started. Thank you for coming. Oh, you, but faithful. And I see we have the back of the bus crowd today. Feel free, as you get comfortable with us, feel free to move us. Thank you, Mayor. Front and center. Make sure the AC is still. So, really appreciate Really appreciate you all being here. I know these trainings aren't always the most fun thing to sit through, but I hope it's really helpful to you all. It's important to us that we do this at least annually. I wish we could do it more often. But we really want to give you information and tools to make you effective board members and commission members. And I just wanted to start out by thanking you all for helping serve the city. We have such a terrific town, and I know sometimes it feels like what you guys talk about in your individual meetings don't make it back to us, but we do try to pay attention. We're looking at ways we can enhance communication between boards and commissions, and I would always encourage you all, if there's something very important that you want to talk to the council about, we do have work sessions twice a month, and you're more than welcome to go with Audra, our city clerk, and ask to be on the agenda to discuss something you're working on, especially positively. We love hearing positive. So I'm very happy today. Last year we did our training with our staff, but this year we actually have Sam Light, who's the general counsel from CIRSA. So CIRSA is for all intents and purposes, our insurance company, but they specifically do local governments and local organizations. So Sam is one of the best attorneys in the state, and I'm basing that not just on hearsay. I think he is very fortunate to have him, and he has been a friend to the city of Trinidad for an awfully long time, and has really helped us navigate through some very important issues. So we can thank him for helping support our community. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him. I do want to mention we have 3 of our council members here today. So Mayor Karen Griego, thank you for being here. And our newest council member Manny Trujillo. So I will be helping present after Sam. We also have our city attorney Les Downs and our city clerk Audra Garrett and Des. What is your title? Jack of all trades. Assistant city clerk. Municipal court clerk. Jack of all trades. Des Sandoval here to support us as well. So thank you again for coming, and with that I'll turn it over to Sam.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing today?
Good.
Good. You made a comment about people tend to congregate in the back. Heads up, I throw all the hard questions to the folks in the back. So there we go, right? Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start first by echoing what Steve said. We're going to do some training around ethics, liability, best practices for elected and appointed officials. But I don't want us to lose sight of this need, which is thank you all very, very much for stepping up, right, to serve your community, help the city of Trinidad, right, move forward and get to whatever vision that is that you all are pursuing as a community. So I know everyone's busy and got day jobs and night jobs and family, everything else pressing out of time. So thank you for carving out time to serve for the city of Trinidad. Very, very much appreciated. So as Steve said, my name is Sam Light, and I'm general counsel for CIRSA, also the deputy executive director there. And a little bit more about CIRSA. That's an acronym which stands for the Colorado Intergovernmental Risk Sharing Agency. It's kind of a mouthful, right? Which is why we call it CIRSA. So we're the city's insurance provider for workers' compensation insurance and property and casualty insurance. We are not a commercial insurance company. We're what's called a public entity self-insurance pool. We're organized under Colorado state law, and all we do, our whole book of business, our only insurers, is insuring Colorado cities and towns and affiliated entities. We're very, very proud of that. We think it puts us close to our member insurers. Our members are our owners. Our board of directors is made up of representatives from Colorado cities and towns, and we have long-standing relationships with our members, which we value and appreciate. To give you a hint of that, the city's been a member of our property and casualty program since 1985, and a member of our workers' compensation program for almost as many many years. So thank you for that long-standing relationship. We're very proud of our partnership with you all in helping you manage risk. So you can read more about CIRSA at www.cirsa.org. We've got all sorts of information there. Probably from where you sit as elected or appointed officials, you might be most interested in, you go to our homepage right across the top, and there's a ribbon, and there's a tab that says Education and Training. And if you drop down on that menu, there's an elected officials page, which has information for both elected and appointed officials on mostly hot topics, recent issues around liability and risk issues, looking at them from that level within the organization, appointed and elected officials, risk. So I think that we have a small enough group. I don't know how often you all get together, but I thought maybe we'd start the morning if every one would like to make further introductions, so we all say hi to each other on this Wednesday morning. So why don't we just go around real quickly and just introduce yourself, let everybody know what board or commission you're with. So we can start over here.
No. I'm Tom Murphy with Trinidad Times TV and Malaire Murphy Funeral Home. I've been filming government to provide transparency for 19 years.
Well, thank you.
He's a part of every board of commission.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jerry Begley. I'm with the Trinidad Urban Renewal Authority, work together with Ed Radio, and I'm glad to be here. I've got some stuff to learn, so I'm looking forward to this.
And I'm Ed Grego, Trinidad Urban Renewal Authority.
Oh, Manuel Trujillo. Trinidad City Council, CML Policy Committee, and Southern Colorado Economic Development.
Linda Vigil, works for the City of Trinidad, and I serve on the ARPA Board of Directors, and I'm an alternate on the MPGA Board of Directors.
I'm Kim Lopez, I attend City Council meetings. Wait. Amanda Gordon on the Lodging Tax Advisory Board.
Debbie Lake, I'm on Parks and Rec.
Karen Wolf, staff, and I work with Urban Forestry.
Mayor and Steve, you're right behind Steve.
Elizabeth Kelly, Historic Preservation Commission.
Hi. Yeah. Sure. Shout it out.
The Arts and Culture Advisory.
David Wright, Parks and Rec Advisory Committee.
Rich Alford, Arts and Culture Committee, as well as Corazon Board.
My name is Snowy Duncan. I'm with the Urban Forestry Board.
I'm Chelsea Calhoun-Hickey, and I'm with the Library Board.
Wendy Hackett, I'm City Employee and Tourism and Community Relations Manager.
Detective Sergeant Lang with the Trinidad Police Department, and I'm on the Housing Authority Board and others.
Did you catch that all?
Yeah,
Already is.
Mary on the City Council. I'm the liaison to the Arts and Culture Advisory Commission and the Trinidad Golf Association.
Margie Farindelli, City Staff, and I'm the Director of Creative District and Main Street.
Krista Franks, Historic Main Street Board.
Tara Booth, the City Employee and Historic Preservation.
Nick Mason, City Planner, and work with the Planning Commission.
Very good.
Les Dale, City Attorney.
Audrey Garrett, City Clerk. Des Sandoval, City Clerk's
Whatever you say.
Whatever Steve said I wanted to.
Jill Lavelle.
Okay, once more, thanks for that. You know, the other thing that illustrated, just all the variety of things we just mentioned that we all do within the organization. Isn't that wonderful? That local governments do. Did we miss someone? Everything from urban renewal to forestry to arts to historic preservation, just a wonderful thing that you do on behalf of your community. So at CIRSA, we deal with what I call the bread and butter issues, right? We get the insurance policies in place, right? We deal with underwriting details, we issue certificates of insurance, all that exciting stuff you think about when you think about insurance companies. Oh, we also have this department on the second floor called the claims department, right? And they deal with claims. But we also at CIRSA, part of that partnership with our members, right, is to make resources available proactively, right, that are available to our members much as well as we like to use to help effectively manage risk on a proactive basis, right, so that we reduce our risk profile as an organization and as individuals, because as elected or appointed officials, it is possible, right, that you can have some liability risk. So we're going to talk about that this morning. Oh, I have a couple of housekeeping items. I want to let you know that we do have copies of the presentation slides for you all. I've also got another handout or two that I'll mention when I go through the materials. About halfway through, we'll take a break to refuel on coffee. That's, I know it's early as well, so please feel free anytime you need to take a break or get another cookie or coffee, please go ahead and do that, and that'll be just fine. So, in terms of what we do at CIRSA, we offer trainings for everyone within the organization, everyone from elected officials to your staff that does operations and public works. What I do along with the director is primarily do trainings for elected and appointed officials around ethics, liability, and best practices, and that's what we're here to talk about this morning. I've kind of organized the presentation in what I call suggestions for success. As elected or appointed officials, I find in doing these trainings for a long time and also in helping organizations work through both claims and risk issues that a lot of the time for elected and appointed officials, it's about committing to principles of good governance, right, and committing to high standards of conduct, committing to work together. So I've organized my suggestions here around best practices for you all as city officials, which I think will help you succeed in your role and as a board or commission, right? But also help reduce your individual risk of liability as well. Okay, we're going to talk about the role of being a public official. We'll talk about transparency. We'll talk about meetings a little bit. I'm always curious to hear how your meeting dynamics are going. Talk about ethical obligations and personal conduct. We're going to talk about organizational structure and liability, about how everyone within the organization has a job description, right? Whether you're an elected official or appointed official, an employee or a volunteer, and that does influence your risk exposure. And then lastly, though, we do a separate training on this, and I'm happy to come visit again and talk with the folks who make these decisions. But the last thing I'm going to touch on during the presentation is some of the legal rules that apply to people who make decisions affecting other people's property rights. So the City Council, the Planning, Zoning, and Variance Commission, and the Historic Preservation Commission, maybe the Building Code Board of Appeals. I'm not sure if they have any others, but those groups that make decisions on land use applications, that kind of thing, there are special rules that apply. We'll talk briefly about that, okay? I do want to make our time together as useful to you all as possible, so feel free to ask me questions at any time during the presentation. Again, you'll have copies of the slides, so they're a resource. So if you've got something that's on your mind you want to chat about, that's just fine. Feel free to ask a question. But I do have to make this disclaimer. Though I am an attorney, this is not an attorney-client discussion. Right? And this is a training. This is a generalized training. This is not intended to get to the nub of any particular issue. And the other thing is, I've been doing this for about 25 years. Before I joined CIRSA, I did what Les did for a long period of time. I have what I think is a pretty good radar for what I call relatable. So yeah, you go ahead and ask me any questions. Sometimes I'll get these questions that, Sam, yes, I've got a question. What if another member of my board does this? And everyone goes, ooh, this is going to be exciting because this is what was in the newspaper last week, right? And this is the burning issue of the day, right? I can still give you some thoughts from a risk management perspective, but if it's an issue for which you need legal advice in the here and now, then that's something that goes to the attention of your city manager or city attorney to assist with. Okay. Same thing if it's a non-legal issue. Sometimes people ask me a question and I'm not sure what's going on particular projects or issues that you got going on, and so sometimes I'll get a curveball like that. I say that's for Steve's team or for Audra and her team to help support you. That does, before I start digging into the substance stuff, that does counsel one overarching suggestion. As an elected official or appointed official, right, recognize that staff is there to serve as a resource and to support your board and commission. Right? If you're new to the job of appointed official, and you're trying to get oriented to why do we do things this way, and what's the question about background, reach out to staff, right? And they can help you get oriented to what the roles and responsibilities are, or to what the city's procedures are. It's a wise organization, right, where everyone works together, right, to get things done and to look good while doing it. That doesn't mean we can't have disagreements on policy. We certainly are, right? But we can have disagreements without being disagreeable, right? And recognize, again, if you're new to the job and you're getting oriented, your website's a helpful resource, but your staff liaison is a helpful resource to you as well. Feel free to reach out with questions to them. Okay.
And Sam, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to give a shout out to us because Sam can hopefully confirm this, but we are one of Sursa's safest cities.
Absolutely. Safest.
Which means we have very few insurance claims. Our safety program that Chief Bacharach has put together is top notch, and we're continuing to get better and better. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
Yay for us.
I'm sorry?
I said yay for us.
Yay for us, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, our claims manager, he says the best claim is the claim that didn't happen, whether it's a work comp claim or a liability claim, right? And so having, good systems and practices and proactive attention to risk really does make a difference, and we're very proud of what our members do, and Trinidad there does a great job of being proactive about risk management. So it's a wonderful thing to celebrate. Maybe your citizens don't come to every meeting and give you a standing ovation for that, right? It's something to be proud of, for sure. Okay. One more question to get a sense of who all is here. So who's kind of new to public service as a public official, maybe like less than a year as an official, appointed official? Okay, so just a couple. Who's in the like 2 years or less range? All right, the 4 years or less? Or who's in that? Is nobody in the 4? How about the 4 to 8 range? All right. Anybody with more than 35 years on the board? Anybody?
Yeah,
Collectively, yeah, that's my record. I can sort of glibly point that out, and the mayor will appreciate that. I said 35 years. I was in a town in southwest Colorado. I asked that question just to get a sense. How long have you been on the board? And the mayor said, well, I've been on the board 35 years. And first thing that jumped to my mind, maybe jumped in your mind, you don't have term limits? Well, we do, but in some communities, the office of mayor is different than the office of council member or board member, so you kind of go. So, however you get there, if you're looking for 35 years of service, thank your community will. They may not give you a standing ovation for it, but they'll thank you for that. And so, the reason I mention that is, no matter how long, if you're just new to being an official for the city, or you've got some years under your belt, I hope the training for you is helpful. For some of you, it may be a refresher, but even if it is a refresher, I think this is a good opportunity to kind of reflect and re-up our commitment to best practices in how we do our work as appointed officials. Okay, so as I mentioned, I organized my training around suggestions for best practices as appointed and elected officials. And so this first suggestion, it may not sound like much of a risk management suggestion, but it really is. You get to skip an opportunity. Everyone, we just did introductions, so I just want everybody hello. Yeah. How are you?
Good.
Good. And you are? And
John Norris.
And you're with which?
Parks and Rec and Planning and Zoning.
All right, welcome, John. So, this may not sound like a risk management principle, but it really is, right? Who agrees with this notion? When you become an elected or appointed official for the city, right, your relationship to the organization and your community changes significantly, right? You're no longer just a citizen of Trinidad, right? You're now a public official, a government official, and I'm kind of here to tell you that from a certain perspective, that's a 24/7 job, right? And that doesn't mean give up your personal life. Please don't, and please enjoy it, right? But recognize, right, in the eyes of the citizens, in the eyes of people who follow the happenings of the city, right, who know you're on a board or commission, they will always perceive you to be, right? A member of that board or commission, a representative of the city, right? A representative of this organization. Yeah, true, that's primarily with respect to public business, city business, and not exclusively, right? Because you know how the buzz is, oh, that person's on the planning commission, or that person's on council, right? And do you all interact with citizens every once in a while? Right, and those ones who are in the know you're on a board or commission, and if they're interested in your business, they may want to talk to you about that, right? So you may bump into a citizen, I'll use city council as my example, you'll bump into a council member, and that citizen says, hey, well, what's council going to do about this? They may do the same thing for you as your board. And maybe your radar's going off, and you're thinking, well, I don't know, because we as a council haven't had a chance to talk about it. Or our board hasn't even taken up that issue yet, right? But the citizens kind of insisted, right? And they said, well, council member, I understand that, but what's your personal opinion? What's your personal, oh, okay, I got a little freedom here, right? You say, okay, you got to temper your comment and say, well, this is only my personal opinion. Here's what I think. This is my personal opinion. This is my personal opinion. What does that citizen filter? City official, city official, city official, right? Yeah. So that hat is always on from that perspective. And as they should, right? Our words, our deeds, our conduct as elected or appointed officials matters, leaves an impression. If we're making decisions that affect people's rights or obligations, it has a significant impact on us, right? And for citizens, if you have that interaction with them and it doesn't go down the way they thought it should, that might even leave a residue with that or some ill feeling. And in a bad situation, it might even give rise to a risk of a liability exposure. So it's important to remember that hat is always on, that you're always a representative of the city. Recognize also that when you got elected or appointed, you're no longer an outsider to local government. You're now insiders, right? And when you're on the inside, right, the liability, the obligation shifts from a risk management perspective. Once you're on the inside, right, please tell me you don't read the city code or have a copy on your desk. Some people do. Some people read all the time. But, within your sphere, whatever your role is, whatever your board and commission does, there are rules that apply. There are rules that apply both substantively to how you make decisions, guide decision making, and there are procedural rules. So, once we get elected or appointed, we're no longer an outsider, we're an insider, and the rules stick to us. We don't have the luxury of saying, I don't like that ethics rule, I'm not going to follow it. Or, maybe your board of commission's got bylaws and rules of procedure on how you handle matters. That doesn't work for me, I'm not going to follow it, you all do what you want. Right? That has consequences. From my perspective, of course, in a bad situation, it can lead to a liability consequence, but it can be very erosive to your board or commission, right? If someone's taking an outsider view and not recognizing, right, that what they really signed up for when they got appointed was to be, right, a contributing member to a multi-member public body. And from a risk standpoint, absolutely the rules do apply. Recognize also, we all may have had different reasons for seeking election or appointment, right? Sometimes it's, I'm concerned about something going on with the city government, or hey, I feel like I have something to contribute, or maybe there was a blockbuster issue, and you said, I'm really interested in that issue, and now I'm interested in serving local government. Those are kind of all outsider perspectives, right? Now that you're on the inside, recognize that there's the role of being a good representative of your board or commission or council, right? In a certain perspective, you're kind of an ambassador for the city within the subject matter, right, that you're appointed to champion, and you're a fiduciary of the city. That's the legal concept that applies to every elected and appointed official. Fiduciary in the legal sense means the legal obligation, right, to put the interest of the organization that we serve above any other interest, including our own personal interest, including sometimes the interest of the small but vocal minority, right? For those of you that are advisory boards and for city council, sometimes that can be very difficult from a policymaking perspective, right? Because you may have a meeting where there's a small but vocal minority, and they're standing up during the comment period, and maybe they're saying, City Council, do this. And then the next person who stands up says exactly the opposite. No, City Council, don't do that, do this. Right, at the advisory level, it's maybe you're working on an important recommendation, right, to the council, and the same dynamic is going on, right? I suggest, in terms of role recognition, if that's going on, recognize that one of your strengths, one of your powers as a board or commission, right, is to take the time that you need and get the information that you need, right, to help make decisions or recommendations that will serve that fiduciary responsibility, right? If you feel like this issue's come in front of your board and commission and it feels like, well, we're just hearing about this for the first time, or we feel like we're under pressure to make a decision, and boy, if we make it tonight, you might be thinking you made that decision in haste. You have the right and sometimes the responsibility to slow things down, make sure you get it right, make sure you're working together to make decisions that serve that fiduciary responsibility to the city as an organization, whatever that looks like to you. Okay?
Sam, we have one of our planning commission members come in. You might ask him how long he's been on the city board of commission. And
Hi there, David. We all did introductions a moment ago, so I want you to say hi and tell us what group you're with.
Hello. I'm the chair of the Planning and Zoning Committee. Frank Leon.
Hi, Frank. Good morning. Okay, a little bit more about role recognition. I know council members take the oath. The appointed officials, you stand up and say, I swear to uphold, and that kind of thing. Yeah, whether you do it expressly or not, right? When you get elected or appointed, you do commit to essentially an oath of office, right? And it's essentially, I swear to uphold the Constitution and laws of the state of Colorado, it's other ordinances of the city, right? That we may not think about that all the time, may not be front and foremost in our mind, but there are certain commitments embedded in that oath, right? A commitment to respect and stay within your area of responsibility, right? That you signed up for. A commitment to lawful conduct, including following the rules that apply to how your board or commission does business. Maybe not the first thing on your mind when you sought an appointment, but once you got appointed, you became subject to the city's code of ethics, as well as state laws that regulate ethical conduct by elected appointed officials. We'll talk about what that means. And then this last one sounds a little fuzzier. But every single one of our boards and commissions has multiple members, right? There's no one member board or commission? That'd be kind of like king. Yeah, that doesn't exist. So we all get appointed or elected to multi-member boards and commissions, and so I think part of the dynamic in recognizing the changing roles, right, is to recognize, each and every one of us brings our own individual experiences, perspectives, right, thoughts to the table when we're talking about a policy issue. But at the end of the day, what we're doing there is we're contributing our individual voice to what? To the voice of the board or commission. At the end of the day, a board, commission, committee acts with one voice, right? So whatever that looks like, I think it does at a minimum require, right, a commitment to collaboration, right? A commitment to professional courtesy and respect for each other's diverging viewpoints and opinions, right? We may not get to unanimity. We may have a split. We may have vigorous differences of opinion on the policy piece, but I do think the job requires that we're actively listening to our fellow members, that we're respecting and appreciating each other's viewpoints, that your meetings, right, each and every member of your board and commission feels like they're in a safe and respectful place to share, right, in a respectful manner, their opinions on issues, right, and not feel like they're being singled out or ostracized or criticized for sharing their thoughts on the substantive issue at hand, right? So I do think that's part of the job, is to respect each other's divergent viewpoints, styles of approaching deliberations and debate, okay? Recognize that when you became a public official, you're now part of a collective decision-making body, right? Whether that's the council or a board or commission or a committee. Most of our boards and commissions maybe have 5 or 7 members, right? So sometimes you need to also recognize that sometimes there's this idea that, okay, well, we got a 7-member board. That must mean I own 1/7 of the power, and darn it, I'm going to go out and use it. No, it doesn't work that way, right? The power of the board or commission or the committee, its ability to act and make recommendations and decisions within its subject matter, that power belongs to the board as a board. Right? I can tell city councils and town boards, when you look at all those hundreds of pages of ordinances, right, you won't find a provision in there that says the power of a board, commission, or council may be exercised individually by one member. Right? So it's important to recognize that dynamic and coupled with that success. Therefore, can't happen without collaboration or consensus. And again, that's not to say that every vote has to be unanimous or universal thumbs up, and that everybody needs to be in universal agreement. In fact, the dynamic of having multi-member boards and commissions is to get diversity of inputs and thoughts and ideas, right? But ultimately, the council, board, commission, committee speaks with one voice. And so it asks that we think in terms of we, not I, right? And then we recognize that being a member of a multi-member appointed body is ultimately a we, it's a we job. I'm helping the we get those, our board, commission, and committee. Okay. This is true for everyone within a municipal organization, but particularly true, I think, for elected and appointed officials and those within the organization and those public-facing, who do most of their work in a public-facing role. Part of the job duties is delivering good governance, right? Which I think both practically and in terms of risk management is dependent upon committing to a couple of core civics principles, which I've listed on the slide here on the left-hand side. And I'm going to break those down a little bit. If we commit to the civics principles, then I think by and large the related risk issue, legal liability issue is going to take care of itself. So, but before I break those down, let me ask this question. Who likes process? Do you like process?
Love the process.
Process. Yeah. Well, if you don't love it yet, you will, and you'll learn. You want to learn to love it and embrace it. Because let's think about that. That's what we do in local government. Right? That's a lot of what we do is provide a process. Think about it if you're on an advisory board, right? Part of your job is to develop recommendations to the council on some issue, right, within your sphere. What is a big part of that job? Providing a forum and a place for people to come and talk about the needs and wants of the community, and then help, right, at either that elected or appointed official level, help determine how we're going to put governmental resources on those needs and wants. And that's a process. That's a process. Yeah, we do in local government sometimes, in all government, get a bad rap. Oh, it takes so long, it's such a process, right? But in terms of local government, some of that process, right, is intentional by design, right? To make sure we're taking the time and getting appropriate information to serve those fiduciary interests, to ensure that we're considering all angles of an issue, right? To make sure that we're being even-handed in how we approach decision-making. So embrace process as a product in and of itself, right? Embrace process irrespective of outcome. Right? You may be on one of those boards and commissions where almost always we can get to universal consensus, but on the other hand, you may be with a group that sometimes we have split votes, right? But hey, either way, we need to recognize that we might win some and lose some, and it's important that we provide good process irrespective of whether we individually agree with the decision that was reached or not. We'll talk more about that later. Okay. You want to consider issues on their merits alone, and you want to leave the citizens and people who leave your meetings, right, with the thought that was a good process. Even a person who disagrees with the recommendation or decision walks away saying, well, I still disagree with what they decided, on that recommendation or that project. But you know what? I feel like they had a good discussion. If there were somebody who commented during the discussion, they say, I feel like I was heard, and I feel like I was respected. And that's a great place to be in terms of building faith and trust right? And each one of you is appointed officials, building faith and trust in your board of commission and in the city as an organization, okay? So let's talk about some of these good governance principles. You want to commit yourself to openness and transparency. We all know this intuitively, right? But being in the public sector, being a public official is completely different than the private sector in terms of expectations and rules around transparency. So commit yourself to openness and transparency, and we'll have few, if any, disputes, arguments, lawsuits over compliance with the open meetings law or the open records law. We're going to talk more in a minute about how that applies to all of you. Commit yourself to fundamental fairness, okay? And you'll have few, if any, claims where someone says, you violated my due process rights. For most of you, this doesn't come up, but maybe for council and the planning commission folks, sometimes historical preservation commission, right? Recognize that staff does most of the legwork to protect you against due process risks. They're the ones that take care of the proper notice of the hearing and things like that, but sometimes it'll present itself, like the planning and zoning folks. You know, maybe sometimes somebody stands up, you open the public hearing, somebody stands up and they say, well, Mr. Chair, I object to this public hearing because I didn't get notice. I always thought that was kind of weird because they're standing right there. So they must have found out somehow.
They got
notice. Yeah.
Then you turn it back over to staff.
Yeah. But sometimes it's a little trickier, right? And so from where you sit as the appointed officials and managing that risk, what we want you to do, as CERSA's perspective, in protecting you against a claim, is just slow the process down. You get whatever the objection. I didn't get notice. There's a problem with the legal notice. There's a problem with the packet. There's some documents that should be in the record that aren't. Blah blah blah. Just slow it down, and usually the presiding officers is going to turn to staff. And what we want you to do is slow it down and make sure we handle that procedural issue at the meeting on the record. And so from where you sit, it's the planning director, attorney, whoever's there for staff support. Do we have an issue with notice? You know, and kind of make a record of, oh, no, we don't. You know, the notice was properly published, we got it done within the requisite period of time, so on and so forth. But I want you to get that all on the record so that it's clear if anyone attempts to challenge your decision on that basis, right? Okay, for other folks, for advisory boards, sometimes it presents itself more in terms of whether things are being added to the agenda last minute. We'll talk more about that. Okay? All right, so that's it on fundamental fairness. Commit to being predictable and even-handed. In addition to the concept of, who likes process, when I say, commit to being predictable and even-handed, that kind of sounds like the boring part of the job, but that's good. That's good, right? Local government, ought to apply the rules to everyone in an even-handed, predictable manner. Right? It's important to everyone who comes in front of us, particularly the business community, but everyone, right? If somebody comes in front of council with a request, right, and they go, okay, I understand from Steve and his team that I have to go to council with this request, and maybe one person comes forward with a request, and their view is, hey, that was pretty simple. I understood what the requirements were, what information I had to provide to the city to support my request. The rules were pretty straightforward. The discussion with council was easy, and I got my approval, no problem. You don't want to be an organization where the vibe, is that somebody else who feels like they're in the same position has a completely different view. And they think to themselves, well, that's odd because for my request, they asked me to provide some information and do some things that I didn't think were required by the city process. There were some strange things going on during the discussion at the board, commissioner, council meeting. And most concerningly, lo and behold, the night they considered my request, that's the first time that the council or commission took some novel and unprecedented interpretation of their own rules and they turned me down. Does that sound like a predictable and even-handed, right, decision-making? No, so we want to avoid that. And that is, we do see the fancy word on, well, I didn't put it on the slide, but the fancy word in my world is that people will sue the decision makers with a claim that the decision was arbitrary or capricious, that the reasons for turning down the request were made up or were off script, right? And that's a pretty common risk that we see for which members get claims, okay? And then lastly, commit yourselves to civility and mutual respect. I touched on that earlier, right? Mutual respect with each other as fellow board and commission members, with citizens that come in front of you, with staff that you interact with. Again, the job is probably one where you don't get to make 100% of the people happy 100% of the time with the decisions and recommendations that you make. But if people leave even the most contentious discussion feeling like they were heard and respected, it was a good process. That's a wonderful place to be. Recognize in terms of risk, who agrees with the notion, at least I'm maybe I'm living in a bubble. I seem to read a lot about incivility in government. Who agrees with the notion that, yeah, well, we can control, 95 to 99% of how things happen. Right? Not everything. We do need to recognize in terms of risk that sometimes the job might require us as public officials, right, to exercise civility even in the face of instability, right? But hopefully that only comes from people who surprise us and come from outside, and they try to do something just to push our buttons with really inappropriate behavior, that we're not doing that ourselves or trying to push each other's buttons. I understand council had a little experience with this 12 hours ago. Okay. Very good. Now, sometimes the job requires civility even in the face of instability. Okay. All right. Any thoughts, questions around those broad themes? Let's pivot and talk about transparency. Okay. So transparency is both an expectation and a legal requirement. Your citizens, right, want transparency. Whatever it looks like to you as an organization, consistent with the resources that you have, right? Commit yourselves to transparency, right? As a product in and of itself, there are legal requirements to talk about, but I think as broad themes, committing to transparency is a good thing, right? Among other resources, if you're a board of commission, recognize that in terms of serving transparency, your website is a wonderful thing, both for you and for people who you may interact with, who ask you about the happenings of the city or your board and commission. Right? Remind folks that if they're interested in what's the Urban Forestry Board up to, well, you can go onto the city website and you can see our agenda, see when we meet next. We always welcome people to come by and visit us. We have public comment period, that kind of thing. So, consistent with the resources that you have, do whatever you can to foster transparency. Citizens will appreciate that and respect you for that. They may not always, again, stand up there in the meeting and give you a rousing round of applause. Right? And the other dynamic is, sometimes there's this dynamic of, we have wonderful meetings, we have good discussions, but there's not a lot of public shows up. Well, don't be discouraged, because they're probably still watching. But what they may be doing is just sort of, quietly watching. And if we have good tools that support transparency, that'll build faith and trust, because they know that they can go to the city website and see the agenda or the minutes, they can look at meeting packets, all that kind of stuff. And they can do that at 11 p.m. when they, or whenever they want, and they'll appreciate that commitment to transparency. Recognize the flip side of that is that definitely, if we cross over the line and violate state legal requirements around transparency, we're going to have a problem, right? But also, if there's a sense that we're playing fast and loose with the rules, or we're getting really close to the line, that's going to erode faith and trust. Right, and how you do business, irrespective of whether there ultimately is a claim for which there might be liability. So you want to be committing to good practices around transparency. Okay, let's start breaking down. I want to go through some of the actual rules that apply to you all here briefly, and then we can talk a bit about some scenarios around that. So we all recognize, right, that as elected and appointed officials, individually and collectively, we're subject to the Colorado Open Meetings Law, right? Staff probably talked about that. Now that state statute got a lot going on, but there's two basic rules that apply to your business. The first is what I call the openness requirement, which says, do you have any boards and commissions or committees that have fewer than 5 members?
Board of Appeals.
Board
of Building Code does.
Okay. Anybody here from the building code? Board of Appeals?
We can't get the vacancies filled.
Okay. All right. Well, they didn't show up, so we're not gonna worry about their meeting. Whatever you want to say, should they can, all right, good. So we all got larger words then. So this openness requirement, right, it applies to the city council and it applies to all local public bodies. That means it applies to every board, commission, and committee that's formally constituted by the city. Everyone here is on one of those bodies, okay? And what it says is that whenever 3 or more members of our board or commission meet to discuss public business, that's a meeting that has to be open to the public, which simply means a citizen has a right to observe your discussion of public business, okay? It goes on to say that any action of your board or commission can only be taken in a duly called and noticed public meeting, the one for which the agenda is posted in advance. And by action, I don't just mean the final action of city council. Action under state law includes taking a position, adopting an ordinance, providing a recommendation, right? Any action that your board or commission takes. It's not the final action only. It does not just apply to the final action of council. It applies to all actions and discussions of your board or commission, okay? So again, 3 or more, discussion of public business by 3 or more has to be open to the public, and any action can only occur in a duly called and noticed public meeting of your board or commission. That's easy enough, we're done. Yes?
I have a question.
Yeah.
For meetings that were actually when you have to have a quorum.
I'm sorry?
Okay, so if you have a board.
Yeah.
That you would have, in my case, you've got 7.
Right.
But you've got historically missing, you'll have 5.
Right.
So does a quorum exist that you have to have a quorum of 7, or do you have to have a quorum of 5 of the 5 sitting active members?
Yeah, Les will correct me if I'm wrong, but the short answer is your quorum requirement is usually a number that's less than the full board. And typically a quorum requirement for a 7-member board is 4 for you all?
4 if you have 7.
Yeah.
But if you only have 5, well, you go ahead and finish.
Yeah. So, yeah, your bylaws or your ordinance, right, and in some cases state statute, not particularly, will define what the quorum requirement is. Typically, an urban renewal authority bylaws and ordinance will say the urban renewal authority has 7 members. 4 members constitute a quorum for the conduct of business. So you have a meeting, and but only 4 members show up. And you got a couple of action items on the agenda. Well, you got enough people to act on those 4 items. But what if one of them says I gotta leave early, and you still got action items left? Now you've lost your quorum for the ability to take action. Okay.
But if you only got 5 active members, 5 sitting members,
yeah,
does 4 still constitute a quorum?
Yeah, 4 would still be a quorum. Yep.
If you have vacancies,
what's that?
even if you have vacancies, unfilled vacancies.
Yeah, you may have local rules that apply. That's why I've got my radar up. So make sure you check, right? So bylaws may talk about that, right? Yeah, but you have to have some local rule that says if there's vacancies, then that can reduce the quorum requirement.
And I don't believe we have that rule, so for I think most of our purposes, and we'll triple check, but a quorum is going to be the number of seats on the board, whether they're filled or not, based on that. So for a 7-member board, even though you only have 5 appointed, it would be 4 members you would have to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to say it even more precisely. We're talking about the denominator here,
yeah.
Right? What's the total number, right? And how are they counted for purposes of determining quorum? For the most common rule is that a quorum constitutes a simple majority of the total number of members, irrespective of whether there's vacancies or not.
Right.
Okay? Yes.
So just to be clear, if you don't have a quorum, can you still have discussion, or do you have to cancel a meeting?
You may have a local rule on that. My thought, my personal thought, is if you have like policy issues and weighty discussions, I think the better thing to do is ask yourself, well, not even a majority of us is here. Is this the time to be having that weighty discussion? Maybe we should wait until everybody's here. We can all share our views on that issue. Yeah. So I think that's the better way to do it. Some bylaws will say if you don't achieve a quorum, you're done. And some will have a practice that says if we have a 7-member board and only 3 of us are here, then we'll just continue the meeting the time that we can get hopefully 7 of us there. I think you left watching give a of practice? Yes. Yeah, I think best practice is if you have a 7-member board and only 3 show up, if you have some minor administrative matter that needs to be attended to, then and it doesn't require action, hey, that's okay. Or if you ask the social person to come down for training and you only got 3 members there, well, let's go ahead anyway. But if it's no, you can't make decisions because you don't have a quorum, and if you're talking about formulating recommendations and policies, I think it's better to more respectful of your fellow members. Say, hey, let's wait until we get everybody in the room. Yes.
So are you distinguishing between the regular meeting and a work session? You can clarify a little bit about notice and quorum and situation in work session?
Yeah, so Les will jump in, or Steve, or Audra if I've got something incorrect here, but here's the simple view of the state law. State law makes no distinction between work sessions and regular meetings, or whatever you want to call it, right? It doesn't matter. If 3 or more people are gathering to discuss public business, it's subject to the openness requirement. Calling it a study session doesn't change it. Calling
Notice is required.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Notice is required for a work session.
And also, I mean, it's better, since a work session is going to be to inform the majority of the board commission, it's better if more are there, since you're eventually going to be taking that information and acting on it. It's just a better practice if you do have more of your members, so more people get all the information that you're going to be acting on. But legally, I think it would be treated the same. Sorry for interrupting, sir.
Yeah, we have 287 members. I think the lore, the common practice, this distinction that's arisen between study session and regular meeting is that study session is kind of thought of as a way to have a meeting for more informal discussion, more information gathering. But in study sessions, we don't make decisions. But we need to be eyes up about it if that's how we treat it, because then our citizens are understanding, hey, they're having a study session. That's where I go as a citizen if I want to learn more, about the details underlying some issue. But also the citizens thinking, well, if it's only a study session, then I know that's not the night they're going to deliberate and make a decision, right? So, we're kind of hoodwinking people if we suggest to them it's only a study session, but then we go all the way to the finish line except for just having a roll call vote. Right? So I think most entities design study sessions as opportunities for additional background information, learning sessions, that kind of thing.
Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the open meetings law is that it contemplates if you have a quorum, it's not just about taking action on items. Public discussions where you have a quorum of members fall under the open meetings law requirements.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. It has to be open, it's quorum, or even lesser, 3. Any meeting, any discussion, 3 or more members has to be open. Okay? Yep. All right, so that sounds easy enough. There are a couple exceptions to this. One of them that comes up is, sometimes people ask, oh, well, we're a pretty friendly group, our board, our advisory board, and we have social gatherings every once in a while. The chair has a barbecue every year, right? Does that mean, since the 7 members of my board are going to be at the chair's house for the barbecue, that has to be a open public meeting? Or maybe 3 or 4 of your board members bump into each other at the coffee shop, right? Does that have to be an open meeting? What do you think? All right, so the state statute says that the openness requirement does not apply to a purely social gathering or to a chance gathering, right? So long as, in either case, discussion of public business is not the central purpose of the meeting. So it's fine, but every community has its own vibe around these issues. If 5 members of our board, decide to go out for coffee or dinner, and the vibe might be the government watchdog, excuse you over there. There's 5 city council members over there. There they are, conducting business in secret. Right? Well, if it's a purely social gathering, the answer is no, they're not. But you got to walk the walk. Right? So for every community, maybe if you have that dynamic going on, it's an educational moment. Right? If you want to, be helpful in that regard, if the person walks over and says, "Oh, well, yeah, I see. Here we are. I got 5 members of the board. I see you're meeting again, and that's a violation." We assure you, right, that we're just having coffee. Right? We don't discuss, right, public business among 3 or more members outside of a public meeting. In fact, our next meeting is next week. We'd love to have you there. That's what we're going to talk about, right? So, but you have to walk the walk on that issue, but it doesn't apply to social gatherings or to chance meetings. All right, we got to get a little more nuanced here and recognize that a meeting for purposes of this openness rule includes any kind of gathering convened to discuss public business, whether it's in person, like we're doing now, by phone, or by electronic means, such as a Zoom, right? Hybrid meetings, like Zoom meetings. Or that phrase electronically was added to the statute in 1996. And back when they added it to the statute in 1996, they were thinking email. Back when we all had Netscape accounts, and you heard that strange noise when you tried to get on the internet. Right? The legislature identified back then, right, that the openness principle applies even to discussions by email, right? So a discussion among 3 or more members of public business by email does trigger the openness requirement. And that's why, right, staff and folks will tell you, do not use email as a vehicle to have discussions among 3 or more members of the public business, right, that's in front of your board, commission, or committee, okay? That all makes sense? Okay. Here's some ways that we can kind of break faith with the open meetings law. 3 or more members have an impromptu meeting before the meeting to sort things out. That's improper. That's contrary to the statute. You bump into each other at the coffee shop. You know, hey, hi, how you doing? Let's talk about we don't want to talk about the Rockies and Broncos.
I'm sorry.
Let's talk about our brackets.
Sorry.
Let's talk about NCAA brackets or whatever we got going. Right? But that's not the time. If the packet came out last night, we say to each other, "Hey, you know, while we're here, let's talk. You know, did you see that request for a budget amendment? Let's talk about. What do you think of that? You can't do that, right? So this kind of impromptu meetings would be contrary to the statute. Similarly, in the virtual world, if you're members of your board or commission, right, have email exchanges with each other to talk about the decisions or recommendations or policies or anything that you got pending in front of your board or commission, that would also be, right, contrary to the statute because it's a discussion of 3 or more members by electronic means of public business. Where's the violation? That discussion is not open. Where the citizen doesn't know what's going on, right? The citizen may have no interest in it, but that doesn't matter. It's their right, to know that the discussion is occurring and have the ability, right, to get that window into your discussions of policy making on behalf of your board or commission. Okay? An easy way to look at this risk in terms of what the statute expects is to look at the purpose statement at the very beginning of the statute. It says the policy of the open meetings law is that the formation of public policy is public business and shall not be conducted in secret. I think the most interesting word in that line out of the statute is the word formation. Formation of public policy, not the final vote, not the final announcement of what we talked about somewhere else and decided, right? It's formation. The whole intent of the statute is to give people an early window. And from a liability risk standpoint, a couple things going on. Recognize that the judges construe the rules broadly, right? And they look at this purpose statement. One of the consequences of an open meetings law violation can be significant from a liability standpoint. It could be a court order that says don't do it again. If you purported to take action not in compliance with the open meetings law, that action can be voided. Sometimes people say, oh, well, that's no big problem. We'll just do a do-over. Well, heck, do-overs aren't so easy if other people relied on a decision that was reached improperly and now a couple of weeks or months have passed and the judge tells us what you did was improper, right? And then finally, if there's a violation of open meetings law, the claimant can potentially recover their attorney's fees, right, which come out of the city's pocket. So in our fiduciary responsibility to the city, we need to make sure we understand it's our obligation to honor the openness of the requirement of statute, so we don't put the city or our board or commission at risk, right, with a potential claim of violation. And then non-legally, what's the injury non-legally? Right, if we end up getting to a vibe where people believe that we're getting close to the line and stepping over the line, then it's hard to repair faith and trust in the government around that issue. Yes?
I'm sorry.
No, please.
one thing that really comes up a lot is the notion of a person, let's say a chairperson will send an email, and we are forever saying, do not hit reply all. So let's say the mayor sends an email to all of council and a couple of staff members. And, you know, I don't think that's a problem. The email goes out, it's not responded to. But if somebody hits reply all and responds, that constitutes an unnoticed meeting, right?
Yeah, particularly once we've got 3 members of a single local public body now talking to each other, right? So the simplest way to manage that risk is don't reply all, right? So one of the handouts that I've got here that I'll leave on the table during the break talks further about the risk around email, okay? And what do they call that? They call it Luddite? Is that a person who's anti-technology?
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm not a Luddite, right? But we need to recognize that the use of email, right, has to be for limited purposes and cannot be used for discussion among 3 or more members of public business of your board or commission. So the handout talks more about this. I said that the statute was amended in 1996 to add electronically to reel in email, right? It wasn't until 2021 that the legislature then finally chimed in to give us more clarity on what types of emails might be okay, right, under the open meetings law. And what they did was they said, they confirmed in the bill passed in 2021 that any discussion electronically by 3 or more members of the merits or substance of any public business that you got going on in front of your group, that's subject to the openness requirement. However, on the other hand, there's a safe harbor for a limited set of administrative type emails, okay? And probably just to keep it simple, what I would suggest is that don't hit reply all, don't have discussions among 3 or more members about anything related to your business as a board or commission member, except in these couple of areas. If the email solely relates to scheduling and availability, that's okay. Auditor sends out an email and says, who's available for a special meeting? And who's available for the next urban forestry board meeting? If all of the members start replying all and everything's flying around, yeah, that's either a discussion going on. But the legislature recognized that if that kind of discussion concerns only mere scheduling and availability, that's okay. Also okay is simply an FYI, okay? So if you're on the Historical Preservation Commission and you read a nice article in some magazine about historic preservation, and you want to send that out to your fellow members, you can send that out and you can say, FYI, here's an interesting article about historic preservation. The risk is members start reading, oh, good article, I think that provision that ought to be in our ordinance. We ought to be updating our code to deal with it. Now people, so FYI is okay.
And Sam, we encourage our boards and commission members, if they want to send an FYI email, send it to staff,
Yeah.
or staff liaison, and we'll send it out on behalf of that person.
Yeah. Yes.
Sam, are you going to cover the applicability of the KORA law as well to emails? Because that, it doesn't really matter whether it's a meeting, you have discussions by email or text with someone on your board, but that also needs to be.
I will. The other 2 categories, the safe harbor, so the scheduling and availability, FYI, but you staff, that keeps them in the loop, so you don't want to surprise them if you all send that FYI and then you all show up at the next meeting and say, hey, I got this nice FYI and staff, how come that's not in the ordinance? Wait, we didn't even see the FYI. Right? So let them send out the FYIs for you. An email that's merely posing a question for discussion at the public meeting is fine too. So the packet gets sent out, I'll just send out the packet to council, and the council member says, dear Steve, regarding the budget amendment, could you be prepared on Tuesday night to discuss this issue? And the council member copies the rest of the council. Well, that's a nice courtesy, because then everybody knows the question is asked, and then Steve and Steve are prepared to answer the question for all the council, right? But there's not a discussion going on there, just posing a question. And then lastly, copying your fellow members on a response to a constituent. Okay? But what I would recommend in that regard is if you get a question from a constituent, the first thing you want to, or a citizen, the first thing you want to do is you want to ask yourself, am I the right person to answer this question? Right? And a lot of times the answer is no. You know, dear council member, I got a ticket in the municipal court. What are you going to do about it? Well, no, you know, the answer is no. That's why we have a court system, right? You know, I get that. So first, is am I the right person to answer this question? The mayor is probably the one who's most on the firing line for this kind of stuff. But if you decide, yes, it's something that I, as a courtesy, ought to respond to, or something that's okay to respond to, if you copy the other members of your board, commission, or committee on the response to the citizen, that's okay too. But in all four of those safe harbors, you've seen what's going on. There's no discussion among the membership of any public business of the board, commission, or committee. Okay? So I would recommend, even though those rules in 2021 were written expressly to apply to elected governing bodies, I don't think that the failure to mention appointed public bodies means that they have any broader authority. I actually think it means they have either the same authority or less, right? So be conservative in that regard. Yes?
Questions in regards to recording of a meeting?
Recording?
Recording of a meeting?
Yeah.
So are there any requirements above and beyond the taking of minutes? Does it need, are there like visual recordings that are required, audio recordings that are required, anything about just taking minutes?
Yeah, I'm going to first start with a question for you all, which are local, you electronically record every board meeting. Yeah.
And there's a retention period for the recording. I want to say it's, I was going to say maybe 6 months. 6 months, and then your minutes don't become public record until they're approved at the following meeting. So, but yes, you're required to record. It doesn't have to be visual, but we are required to have an audio recording.
We don't send those to you. Keep them ourselves.
The minutes are actually supposed to be submitted to the city clerk's office.
Okay.
Yeah, you want the organization, the city as an institution, to be the custodian of those minutes for the permanent record. You know, it doesn't come up all that often internally. Sometimes there's external requests for a copy of the minutes, but sometimes you may, you know, this year, your board worked on a plan for trail improvements. And 2 years from now, you're still working on it, you know, you may internally, you know, oh, minutes from that meeting a couple of years ago would be helpful. So you want to get those, right? So some board of commissions, a member helps work up the minutes, is that right? Or is it all the staff support?
Oh, it's kind of a mixture.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're the person, you were busy enough, but if you're the person either volunteered or got conscripted into doing the minutes, get in touch with the staff liaison, make sure that that gets properly handled, and the final adopted minutes do end up in the city's repository. Yeah. All right. Was there no
Just one quick thing on that, Sam. Also, if you send your minutes to Audra and you've had a discussion you'd like the council to know, you can let her know we'd like these minutes shared with the council. And that's a great way for our city council to get feedback on what they're doing as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
On best practices. What you mentioned about in my position, I get no correspondence via snail mail, mostly to me only.
Yeah.
What's the best practice? Do I read that letter in a public meeting, or what I'm doing now is sending it to Audra to disperse to the rest of the council?
Yeah.
Is there a better way to do that?
Well, it might be situational depending on the correspondence. You know, I think a lot of folks may think that if it's clear from the correspondence that what they want to do is speak to the council, then I think the method of sharing it with council is the right way to do that. On the other hand, you may get a piece of correspondence from the constituents that's and they didn't know what the process was, and maybe they have some deep and serious concern regarding something that's going on with their family. And the city may not even have an appropriate role, but they thought they'd reach out to the mayor, right? And, well, you know, maybe they get together with Steve and guys and Audra as necessary and say, you know, what do we need to do with this one? But you certainly, if it's clearly suggests that the person expects privacy and confidentiality, then get some team support on how you handle that. right? If they send it and it really has nothing to do with the city, then you're probably going to tell them, just individually or privately, thank you, but this is not a city issue. If it does raise something that implicates the city, right, they may help you with a response that says, look, thank you for that information. Just to let you know, we can't necessarily honor your confidentiality request regarding this because this may be an issue that has to be reviewed by the manager's office or the attorney's office or what have you. But I think, short answer, if it's one where they intend to, they're trying to speak to council as a whole, but you're not sure whether the whole council got it, then your clerk's the support person can help you disseminate that. All right, let's talk about, yes, here's the question. Are your emails, who uses email, by the way, to do their job as elected appointed officials? Yeah. Are your emails sent or received wearing that public official hat, a public record?
Yes.
Yes. And they are irrespective and separate from the openness requirement. Remember, you can't have discussions of 3 or more by email, because that triggers the openness requirement. But independent of that, even if it's just 2 members when talking to each other by email, that email exchange, right, if it relates to your duties as a public official or relates to public funds, that's going to be a public record. Available to anyone who wants to go into the clerk's office and file a public records request. There are certain exceptions that Audra and Les, right, will help figure out if there's a request. Right? There's a long list in the statute of certain types of information that cannot be disclosed, right? But in general, almost all of those don't apply to your routine correspondence. So you need to recognize that the emails that you send and receive as a city appointed official, by and large, are going to be public records open to inspection by anyone. Okay? Sometimes people ask, well, is that true if I'm using, do you all have city issued email addresses? Council does. Other folks don't? And sometimes people ask, wait a second, that doesn't apply to me because I just use my home computer. The ownership of the device that's used is not the answer. It's the content, the rules content. Is the content of the email that was sent or received, does that concern your role as a public official, or does it concern public funds? Okay? So, a couple of takeaways there. Just recognize that your emails then can be subject to the open meetings law, that the email can be a public record independent of any meetings issue, right? So be circumspect in your use of emails. You know how you think you're writing to just one fellow board member, but the audience may be someone you never had in mind, right? And once you press send, you can't control where that email goes, right? My simple takeaway, putting on more of my litigator's hat, is don't say in an email anything that you wouldn't want to read in a newspaper, right? Or have read back to you in a deposition, right? Or that you wouldn't want to say in a public meeting, right? So I'm continually fascinated by the misperception that email is somehow a cloaked method of communication for public officials, because it ain't. Now, in the new world, is this trend repeating itself? What do you think of texting? If you read the papers, you saw the state legislature. The state legislature is using some, who has teenagers? Everybody know what WhatsApp is? You know, you send a message and it disappears. So the state legislature got dinged for using a version of that, right? Yeah, Snapchat, Snapchat, I got too many teenagers. So the state legislature got embroiled in the controversy around that issue. I want to go back to one last thing here, if I can. So the openness rule is a rule of 3, right? And it requires that the discussion be open to the public when 3 or more members are discussing public business. So that must mean that a one-on-one discussion is okay, right? Absolutely. That's my view. As a municipal attorney, that's my view. It's triggered when 3 or more. It doesn't apply to one-on-one. So we all agree? 3 or more rule applies one-on-one? Doesn't apply. What about one-on-one? Is that okay? Yeah. They got all sorts of names for that. They call it a serial meeting or a walking forum, that kind of thing. Here's the bottom line on this issue. Do not use one-on-one meetings as a substitute for discussions you should be having in a public meeting, and do not use it for a substitute for taking action. Okay? Well, how does this issue even come up? Well, if you all show up at a meeting and people feel like it's the first time this subject's been on the agenda, and people feel like they're walking into the middle of a conversation that occurred somewhere else, it's pretty natural for them to ask, when and where did this all get like that? Right? Or you got something on the agenda for the first time and somebody says, well, we've talked about this before, and I just make a motion, and there's no discussion. Right? I have a couple of cases, it seems to be a trend, something in the water the last couple of months, that for governing bodies, people come out of the executive session and immediately there's a vote, and there's no discussion. That claim may or may not end up on the right side of the law, but it raises suspicions and concerns about transparency, right? So you want to be very cognizant of the idea that the open meetings law also does not permit using one-on-one discussions as a substitute for open meeting deliberations or for taking action. The way it works in the claims world is if the evidence comes in that what happened at the meeting was a mere rubber stamping of discussions and decisions that were made elsewhere, then that's where the violation lies. Okay? All right, let's talk about meeting best practices real quick. Just, you all know this, but, good meetings, right? Take a little bit of planning and investment and commitment by folks. Make sure you give the agenda the time and attention it deserves, right? Yes.
I didn't hear that you addressed social media. This town runs on Facebook. So if somebody posts something and then you have 3 different people from a board commenting on it.
Yeah, if their intended audience is each other, I think we run into the same risk issue. Yeah, just to keep it light, I do separate trainings on social media, but and no pun intended here, when I say keep it light, I think social media, we ought to keep it light no matter what the outside world is doing in terms of Facebook. I don't think Facebook or any social media platform is a good substitute for your open meetings. And they're just ill-designed and ill-equipped to be an appropriate measured forum for deliberation of lofty policy issues that you're asked to tackle. Right? Absolutely. I think that if 3 or more members are using social media to talk to each other, right?
There's some public comment and then 3 people on a board.
Yeah, that may not trigger the openness requirement in the open meetings law. But in terms of holding faith and trust into how we as a board of commission do our process, maybe our posts ought to be, hey, not starting to debate with these people on social media, but tell them, hey, thank you. Hey, so you all know, our board of commission's next meeting is next week. And click here to the city website, and they'll take you to the agenda. Even better, to take yourself out of the crossfire, just tell staff, hey, can you look at whether it would be appropriate for us to put something on the city's social media site and let people know about this issue, so that I, as a point official, can just remove myself from this chaos and just point them to this, hey, remind people that we do have a process that we use as a board of commission. Okay. Is that helpful? Yep. I forgot to mention at the outset that one of the resources that I've got some hard copies for the elected officials, but this is also available in PDF format through our website. On the public-facing side of the website, there's a chapter in our ethics, liability, and best practices handbook about social media. Okay? I think social media is a good place for saying things that are light and they're supportive and touting our own successes and things like that. But having debates about controversial issues is not a good tool for that. In terms of public meetings, make sure that we stay on the agenda. Right? You want to resist the temptation to add agenda items. There is a liability risk aspect to that. And the statute, the open meetings law says your agenda shall include specific agenda information where possible. Okay? So we don't want to be adding agenda items night up. Okay? And a good way to look at that risk is if you're thinking about that, even with the best of intentions, you go, oh, shoot, I forgot to ask our staff liaison or the clerk to put this on the agenda. If you go, wait a second, if we add this item to tonight's discussion, is there an empty chair here in our meeting room that would have been filled? Had somebody known we were going to talk about that issue? Right? So we want to be cognizant of that as well and make sure that our agenda reflects all the items that we're going to talk about that evening. And avoid the temptation to engage in agenda creep. Sometimes during the informal part where we're just talking about issues, somebody brings up an issue. Oh, I've got something just to report to everybody. But that's a juicy kind of thing. And then everybody starts jumping in, and before we know it, we're talking in detail about that issue. And then finally somebody says, oh, let's just do this. That sounds good. And now we made a decision, and nobody knew. All of our decisions have impact on someone to a greater or lesser extent. So we want to make sure that people who want to be involved in hearing your discussions have an opportunity to be present. Use and expect civility in your meetings. Yeah, we work with them by being informal, but we can be informal to a fault sometimes. So we want to maintain some formality in meetings, whatever that looks like to you. Do we have people during public comments speak from a podium? We certainly want them to speak one at a time. We certainly want people to appreciate that it's the board meeting, and we ought, you can control it or not, whatever your desires are, but meetings ought not to have a dynamic where everybody in the audience is now debating with each other directly, rather than talking to you as the board that's meeting, that kind of thing. If you have public comment, do you all have public comment periods? Yes. Now, do you all, council probably more than others, do you have time periods around that? Yes. You can have time periods around that, just make sure it's even-handed. Make sure that you don't try to quash citizen speech during public comment based on what they're saying. If your rule is public comment period, you got 90 seconds or 3 minutes to say whatever on your mind, well, that's what it means. They got 3 minutes to say whatever on their mind. Okay? They're on an extreme margin. There's some exceptions to that, but just understand, even if they're being critical, or even if they're engaging in a personal attack, we're just keep our eye on the 3 minutes. Thank them for their comments, and then we're going to move on. Because I assure you, even if you're the person who's subject to a personal attack, there's not much you can say in the moment that's going to change that person's mind. So better off just to say thank you for your comments and call off the next person. Okay. Recognize staff is there also to support you. If something comes up during public comment and you feel like that requires a response, we at SOSA recommend that you wait until the entire public comment period is over, right? And then if it's something that staff really can help you with, the chair, in terms of staff, with the staff, can help answer that question that came up in the public comment, that kind of thing. Do you all have rules of procedure? Do you use Robert's rules? We do. Okay. Recognize that Robert's, last time I checked, was about 480 pages. Whoa. Something like that. I use Robert's rules for dummies when I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Okay? But if you're subject to Robert's, yeah, there's an answer in there for Robert's. You want to get the answer right, but also recognize that, there can be paralysis if we're overly rules driven. So recognize for most, particularly advisory boards, a lot of times we have debates on Roberts and we're not even really sure 100% what the actual rule in Roberts is. Right? It's like this, does a superseding motion need a second by the person who's on the prevailing side? A lot of procedural problems can be resolved just with consensus. If the presiding officer understands that everybody in the room is okay with handling the procedural issue this way, then that's probably going to be okay. But if we do follow Roberts, then we need to slow down and make sure that we're okay in that regard. Maybe have a little cheat sheet or just feel, because even under Roberts, only 4 or 5 things come up commonly, right? And so just chairs in particular get together with staff and work out an understanding of what those are. All right, let's pivot and talk about ethics real quick. Probably wasn't the first thing on your mind when you became an appointed official. Did you, when you became an appointed official, became subject to the Colorado, well, actually for the city's code of ethics, since you're a home rule municipality, right? And yeah, ethics issues that pop up, and they're in the newspaper every now and then, and sometimes they're even kind of fun and interesting to read about when they don't involve us. Right? If they involve the state legislature, then it's very exciting to read. Right? But more seriously, just recognize, right, that there are standards of conduct that apply to you, and you want to find out who agrees with this notion. Ethics rules kind of seem like they're written in legalese. And they're in,
go ahead.
Go ahead. And they're in some faraway place, right? Well, they kind of are from that perspective, right? But they're in your city code, right? And get together with staff and take the time. Maybe you got a little summary of them or whatever they are. take the time to plow through the rules to get a good working understanding of what the expectations are so that you're prepared to spot and deal with an ethics issue in advance. One of the saddest things that I deal with in the claims world is once in a while, like the reporting official is on the receiving end of an allegation of an ethical transgression, and it has legs to it, but the response was, I didn't know that was contrary to the code of ethics. So the way to manage your risk around that is to get a good understanding of what the expectations are. Is that what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, something came up a couple times last year.
Yeah.
And it had to do with ethics. And first of all, I'm very pleased to sit on the tour board in certain community, and I hold ethics in high regard. However, there's really some confusion with regards to how our city charter, our municipal code, at least confusion to me. In chapter 2, it says, of the charter, it says, members of boards and commissions shall be subject to removal for just cause by a majority vote of the council. And that's where it ends. It starts and ends there, be subject to your words. Those are the kind of the identifying words in there.
Yeah.
However, there's a process if you go to the municipal code. In the municipal code, for members of the city council, for members of boards and for members of the commission, there's due process there. There's actually, it's not the city council, at least in the municipal code, that rules on that. They actually seat a board of ethics, and we had that came up several times over the last couple of years. And so there is a process that's there. And so my thinking on that, and I think board members need to be let us know that this ended up being something that was added to a consent agenda item, and that the city council itself could decide with no due process to any board member or commission to rule and decide to remove somebody in a consent item, which to my reading of what we currently have, and I'm okay if we change that, but what we currently have, there was due process, there was a board that came up, a person had an opportunity to defend themselves or at least give their side of where they were. And so to me, this really makes it tough sitting on boards and commissions in the city of Trinidad. When you read one part of the charter and it says you'd be subject to removal, and then you look for the recourse and the process that you would go through if somebody called you up on an ethics violation,
Yeah.
and you're seeing that as where your remedy will be, both the remedy for the city and the remedy for that sitting board and council member. I just thought that process, the way we did it at that time, hopefully you don't have those many times, so that you don't get so consistent with it. But when the city council went into executive session and they did come out, as you said, there was just a vote taken. There was no discussion with regards to how this law fit, where they were looking at it being the city charter that would have been the primary thing. There was no reason or thing to that. And I thought that if people do bad, remove them. But I think there should be a process.
Yeah. So I said, I'm not sure if you're here when I said I have a radar. Where they can see the line. So it sounds like this was a while back, but it sounds like there's some
I'd say
some thought about it.
6, 8 months.
Yeah, the other piece from services perspective, I don't know all the details of your charter and code and how they work together, so I really can't speak to what the specific legal requirements are. It wouldn't be fair to me to offer an opinion without knowing that, and frankly, it's why I invited less. But in this forum, it's also not the place to get to the nub of the issue. There are issues around this, but it's going to depend on what charters say and statutes say. From a broad risk perspective, the question, I'll just identify the broad risk question and I'll stop there. The broad risk question is, we start with the presumption, or the question of, is there some protected right to the holding of office? And in certain circumstances there are, in certain circumstances there aren't. It depends upon the underlying laws that govern that particular office. Okay? So in my world, in the claims world, when we see those kind of claims, we have to dig into state law if it applies, charter, if there's a charter, ordinances, and look at the question of whether there's even a property interest or a property right that applies to this particular appointment.
Well, the reason I bring it up isn't to get a legal opinion from you or from Wes. It is that I think it's important in times like this for folks that are going to sit on boards and commissions to understand what that process would be if they violated any of the things that you've laid out, right?
And I would like to say that I have given a legal opinion on this subject, and this is a problem because Mr. Howlett, Sam Light, me, Pat Howlett, Sam Light, that my legal advice is being ignored, contradicted publicly, and Mr. Howlett is telling my client, city council, to disregard my legal advice. So it's an ongoing problem. I'm going to talk about that when it's my turn, but it's a problem. So I just wanted to say that, and I will address that. But thank you.
Thanks. Yep. Well, you know, organizations, governing bodies appoint legal officials to represent the city, right? And you want to look at and rely upon the legal advice of your attorney. Okay. I will say, in terms of individual risk, right? When I was a municipal attorney for 25 years, sometimes I was surprised, but you remember that the obligations are to the client as a client, and direction from the client comes from the client, right, as an entity and not my individual member. Right? So be cognizant of those issues. Okay? All right.
Hey, Sam?
Yeah, let me.
Do you have a break schedule?
Yes, I do after. Yep.
There it is, okay.
Sorry, I got to slow down on transparency and I just finish up ethics and then we're going to take a quick break. All right, so on the code of ethics, I do separate trainings on ethics. I just want to get 3 things on your radar to take a look at the code. The main rules around ethics are the conflict of interest rule, right, confidential information, and gifts. On conflicts of interest, just get a good understanding of what a conflict of interest is. Under your code, you have a definition of both direct conflict and indirect. Direct conflict means, right, well, we all know what a conflict of interest situation is in general, right? Whenever my board or commission is going to take some kind of action, right, that affects my own personal financial interest, I'm in a conflict situation, right? And that's when I have to disclose my conflict of interest, recuse myself from the discussion and vote, and not attempt to influence other members. So to give you an example, if I'm on the planning commission and I own property, yes, you have the right to own property in the city. But I want to subdivide my property. Well, you have that right too. But your subdivision application has to go in front of the planning commission, of which you're a member. You now have an obligation when that agenda item comes up. You turn to the chair and say, Chair, I need to make a disclosure before you begin this public hearing. I have a conflict of interest in this matter because I'm an owner or a part owner of the property under consideration. You recuse yourself from the discussion and vote, and you step away from the dais. Absolutely. Do you leave the room? Do you leave the room? I don't think you have to. I'm not sure what your local rule says, but I encourage it. Right? Not because of the body language. I don't think the person from the conflict's going to go to the back row and go, yeah, good comment. But what I worry, and if they just observe, maybe that's fine. But what I worry about is sometimes it's a dynamic where a question comes up and the person who holds the interest thinks that they have this constitutional, as they do, they have a constitutional right to deal in their own property, but they're also subject to the code of ethics. So a question comes up, yeah, I have a question for the applicant. And who's here to speak for the applicant? Oh, I am, and it's the person who holds the conflict, right? And then say, okay, a couple questions. Maybe it's a softball question like, oh, well, how big is the property? Oh, that's you're not going to get in trouble with that. It's 10,000 square feet. Oh, but by the way, we've got a beautiful landscaping plan, right? And we're going to use wonderful architectural materials, and the new house that we're going to build them in, you're going to love it. What does that sound like? Influence. And the code of ethics says that if you have a conflict of interest, you may not attempt to influence your fellow decision makers. You have to step away completely. So protect yourself in that regard. It might sound unfair, but it's perfectly fair, and it protects you from individual risk. Get someone else to do your speaking for you, to be your representative on that matter. Yes, sir.
So did you say not? You would want to take yourself out of the room?
I think that's better practice. I recognize that it's not legally required unless you have a local rule. Yeah. But if you stay in the room, I would encourage you to not make any comments to the body. I've had ethics situations where the official did everything like perfect disclosure, stepped away from the dais, but then they engaged in a discussion with the decision makers. And whether the accusation had traction or no traction, somebody for sport, or because they were a government watchdog, or because they hated that person, they filed an ethics complaint and said that person was engaging in improper influence. And they got up and spoke on the matter that they had a conflict about. So obviously these are fact specific, but in terms of general risk management, and if I want to protect myself from that accusation, no matter where it comes from or the motives behind it, I just take myself out of it completely. Right? Yeah. If I doesn't mean you can't have a champion, absolutely, get a champion. The champion your whatever it is, whatever your request is, but have it be somebody other than yourself.
Can you can you recuse yourself, take off your hat of being, a board member and then be on the other side of the bench and be a citizen presenting your own case?
No. Yeah. Like I said, it's fact specific. If you're just answering a simple objective question, maybe you don't get in trouble with that. The rule says do not attempt to influence the fellow decision maker. So if you're being the advocate, right, for your own case in front of the body of which you're a member that has authority over that matter involving your own interest, that's a conflict of interest situation. Yeah. And again, I get it. People say, well, that's unfair. I have a right, like every other citizen, to make this request. And I say, yeah, that's absolutely right. But also look at it, there's only 7 people or 5 people that either get to make the recommendation or the decision, and as government officials, they have to, they can have their own personal interests, but they also have to abide by the ethics rules. And these rules have been tested and upheld repeatedly. They're not unconstitutional rules. These are ethics rules. They're absolutely applied. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
Can a conflict of interest be in another direction besides monetary? Because I've seen at boards and commissions where somebody wants to abstain because that's their wife's cousin's uncle or something.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with anything, but they just want to make a decision.
Yeah.
So is that a bona fide way? Because when you're having to take a vote, and that could be critical on one side or the other, is that a bona fide way to declare a conflict of interest only because it's a cousin 3 times removed or something?
Yeah, so Les, you can add if you like, but as I mentioned earlier, your code recognizes also indirect conflicts of interest, and I think the standard is essentially this: if to a reasonable person it looks like your participation would raise an appearance of impropriety, then I think the code uses the should recuse yourself, it kind of encourages recusal, right, to put the interest of the board above one's own interest. Now, continuing down that path, further down the continuum, don't confuse conflict of interest with lack of desire to vote on a controversial issue. Okay? If you got a tough issue and everybody's like, oh, no matter how I vote, people are going to be mad at me, right? It's not a conflict of interest to say I'm going to abstain from voting for a political reason, right? So don't confuse the two there, right? Yeah. Okay. A couple other things. Don't disclose or use confidential information for personal benefit. That's pretty straightforward. You as boards and commissions, council's going to see this more often, but boards and commissions usually don't come across confidential information that often, or renewal authority might. Like once in a while you'll get a confidential draft of an agreement, or maybe you'll get an appraisal, that kind of stuff. Just recognize that the confidentiality for any information you receive belongs to the group. That's the fiduciary obligation. No individual member has the legal right to waive confidentiality or give away confidential information unless the release of that information has been properly authorized. Okay? So, and then gifts. We're all pro bono, right? Maybe council gets a small monthly stipend for being on council, but everyone else, yeah, so it's not the salary, and I'm also here to tell you it's not the lavish gifts. The public service, it's just love of community, right? But more seriously, just recognize we do have rules around gifts, right? And the simple way to avoid getting into crossfire is just don't accept any gift. If it's clear, right, to a reasonable person that the gift is being offered, right, to influence your vote on something, or to reward you for some vote, or to try and get you to depart from the faithful and impartial discharge of your obligations as a public official. Okay? Okay. I put some ethics scenarios there that I think with my limited discussion of what the rules are, you can work through those on your own and think about how those apply to you. And from there, we're ready for a break. So we're going to break for what, 10 minutes? Let's break for about 10 minutes. Feel free to come up and grab the handout and email.
When you refer to that super mayor, what is the case study?
Thanks for